All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 53 of the Talking Friars podcast. I'm Ben Fadden here with Jon Schaeffer, special guest, Extra 1360. He hosts the afternoon drive show with Rich Orenberger. He does a great post-game show that I love with Jim Russell on the wrap-up show. So definitely, tune into that. Jon, thank you so much for spending some time here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate you saying that about the afternoon show with Rich and what we do with the Padres. It's nice when people enjoy what we do, and as you know, watching Padres or covering the Padres is a little bit of a labor of love when you're doing baseball, and it's so many games all year long, and you're working late hours. But we enjoy doing it, so I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, all right. So let's start off. Going into the season, the Padres were the second best team, I think, on paper, behind the Dodgers. And it was pretty dang close between the Padres and the Dodgers. But things haven't really gone, the way that AJ Preller and Jayce Tingler and everyone thought that they would. So what if you had to point to one area, what has surprised you the most about this team kind of underperforming?
I think it's a really good question. I think that they've probably underestimated how much pitching they would need in terms of starting pitching to get through this thing. Not to say that 2020 was a mirage, because I don't think it was, but I just think that the way you attack a 60-game baseball season as opposed to how you attack a 162-game baseball season is just completely different. And you can be good in both scenarios, or you could be good in one and not in the other. Right. And I think the Padres were really good, obviously, a year ago, and they turned it on and took advantage of that short season. And I think this year they've been good. They just haven't been as good, like you said, as maybe some of the expectations were. And you look now where the Dodgers and the Giants are, and if we're being honest, they're not as good as those teams. They haven't had those same seasons. They haven't. They're not going to win the NL West. There's no scenario for them to win the NL West. There's no scenario where they host a wild card game. Now, can they get into the postseason? Absolutely. And I like what I've seen over this last week after the wheels really did fall off there in the middle of August. But, you think about that week where they add Snell and Darvish and Musgrove, you're like, they're an embarrassment of starting pitching. But it's not as simple as that, because as we know, there are ebbs and flows, there are big injuries, and there are minor injuries, there's ineffectiveness, and they just didn't have parts 5, 6, 7, 8 that maybe some other teams did, or maybe they were somewhat unlucky and lost some of these pieces that other teams didn't lose. But like when you don't have Lamet, because for whatever reason, right, he hasn't been the same pitcher he was because of his health. When you don't have Morahone, when you don't have Weathers because he's ineffective, they just didn't have, where was that pitching depth in AA and AAA? And where was that move that I think a lot of people assumed AJ Preller was going to make at the deadline? And it didn't have to be Max Scherzer. I mean, we all would have taken Max Scherzer, but I don't think it had to be Max Scherzer. I think a lot of people would have been content with a couple of just serviceable starters. So I think it starts and ends with starting pitching. I think they're still capable of finding a way to get in, but the margin for error is gone, and they're going to need Snell to be the Snell he's been. They're going to need Musgrove to be the Musgrove he's been. And it goes on and on and on.
Right. You mentioned, the pitching depth. At the deadline, obviously they don't go out and get a starting pitcher, which was really surprising to me. But now with that said, so do I blame AJ Preller for that? Yes. But going into the year, what is AJ's job? His job is to put the team in the best position on paper to have success. And you could make a very great argument that he did that, and that their trade deadline essentially was before the season, and those guys just have not produced. Now, Blake Snell, great outing last night. He's had like 5 straight good starts, so he is producing now. But we just imagine where they would be, going into if Blake Snell did this the entire year. But I guess my question is, how much blame do you really put on AJ, for where the pitching is now, when you could make an argument that he had plenty of depth going into the year? I mean, Paddock, Weathers, Lamet, Morahone. You thought Gore would look, at some point, but he just hasn't, found it in the minor leagues. I haven't even started talking about Darvish, Snell, Musgrove. So, and Matt Strahm coming back, he could maybe start. Obviously, that's not going to happen now, but you can make the argument that he had the depth. So how much blame do you really put on AJ, for the pitching woes right now?
First of all, I think AJ Preller did a really good job putting this roster together to start the season. And I think AJ Preller deserves credit for the state of the organization, really, regardless of what happens this year. I'm still high on the Padres in 2022 and 2023, even if this team isn't a postseason team, which would be disappointing. And I think that is to some extent a reflection on AJ, but you got to remember it's about more than just one season, and really good teams and franchises put these things together often, right? Not just one out of every 10 years, but 4 out of every 5 years, or 10 out of every 11 years. I will say, I think he was overly optimistic. And when I say he, I mean the front office and the organization, on what they were going to get out of the Weathers, Morahone, Gore, Paddock complexion of the rotation. Because there was a lot of, potentially this could transpire and work well. Ryan Weathers is 21 years of age and never pitched above A ball. So, I can spin it on the other side of the coin easy. I can tell you Chris Paddock had a good 2019, but I can tell you he had a bad 2020. I can tell you Adrian Morahone is a highly sought-after prospect, but he's just that. He hasn't necessarily proven it at the big league level even before the injury. And then I can tell you Mackenzie Gore was apparently a shell of himself in 2020. And why was there a reason to believe that he was going to – it's one thing to think he's going to get up. It's another thing to think that he's going to be a meaningful starter and pitching in important games for you down the stretch of the season in a pennant race. So I think that they were a little bit too optimistic on really what they had. And, to their credit, going out and getting Blake Snell and Yu Darvish and Joe Musgrove was those were stabilizing moves. There's no question about that. They knew they wouldn't have Mike Clevenger, and I think he thought he wasn't going to have Dinelson Lamet. That's why he made those moves. I think it was those secondary moves where they left some disappointed, including myself, where I think, where was that 35-year-old starter with 5 years of service time or 10 years of service time in AAA? Where were those flyer guys even to start the year? And then at the deadline, to your point, I think your point's great. He made a lot of his moves in the offseason. But come July 31st, it doesn't matter. It's about the data points that are in front of you. Where are you sitting? What do you look like today? I agree with you.
What I'll say, let me interrupt there. What I'll say to that is, you talk about Weathers and all that, and then you say it doesn't matter at, July 30th this year. It doesn't matter, with the resources. But with the resources that they had, because of the trade deadline that they had in the offseason, their resources just weren't as great to make moves at the deadline. Now, could they have gone out and gotten maybe a Kyle Gibson? Maybe. But they weren't going to get a Max Scherzer. They weren't going to get a Barrios because they're not giving up Abrams and Hassel. They're just not going to give that up.
I think it's, I think we'll never know. I think they were in on Scherzer. And I think at one point along the way, it might not have been when Ken Rosenthal tweeted, but at one point along the way, they thought as if they had a decent chance to land Max Scherzer. And if they did think that, then they knew they were giving up a boatload of future talent in an effort to win right now, whether that's Luis Campusano or Robert Hassel or Mackenzie Gore or whomever it is, or CJ Abrams. I guarantee, I can't guarantee it, but they put themselves in a position. If they were talking to the Nationals about Max Scherzer, which AJ Preller said they were, although they might not have gotten as close as some people believe they did. If they were talking to the Nationals about Max Scherzer, it wasn't about the 15th prospect in the organization. It was about their top catching prospect, their top position player, right? Mackenzie Gore. Those players were being mentioned. Now, maybe they balked at it. Maybe the Dodgers put together a better package and had, better players available in their system in that exact moment. But I hesitate a little bit when we say that they didn't have the players necessarily to pull off some of those moves. That they had those players. Now, the depth of their system wasn't what it was in 2019. But you're not talking to the Nationals about Max Scherzer if you're not willing to part ways with future, with your future and with prospects. So listen, I don't think Max Scherzer is the difference between this team winning the World Series or not, if I'm being honest. Do I think it's the difference between getting into the postseason or not? Yeah, you could make that argument. We'll see how the next 30 days plays out. I will say that, in my opinion, with everything they knew about the state of their roster on July 30th, they should have added starting pitching. They didn't. He knows a lot more about his team than I do. We'll see how it plays out in September. No matter what happens, it's not like it's the end all be all. Again, there's 2022 regardless of what happens. I just think in the moment, and I think in a month later, they should have added starting pitching.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. Now let's move to Larry Rothschild. Pitching coach obviously fired. I thought Tingler's comments were a little interesting and confusing. He said that they needed a new voice, but Ben Fritz has been there the whole year, so that isn't really a new voice. He then said that it was 100% his decision. despite it taking 10 to 12 days for it to actually happen. So it was just mixed messaging there. What really, were your thoughts and the messaging wise for Larry going?
I didn't love what I heard from Jayce Tingler either. I do understand the possibility of getting that new voice in that exact role. And maybe that has been beneficial over the last week and a half. How do we even know? I mean, it could be coincident, it could be a coincidence that they've pitched better over the last week. It's not like they've all of a sudden gone 7-0 since they fired Larry Rothschild. In fact, they're under 500 since that happened. I think they're a game under since it happened. But I will recognize the fact that I think the starting pitching over the last week has been good. And is that Ben Fritz? Is it a coincidence? Is it the guys taking some accountability? What I wish I heard from Jayce Tingler, and what I wish I do hear more often from Jayce Tingler and even in AJ Preller, is just a higher level of accountability. That, yes, we're going to part ways with Larry Rothschild, but this isn't only on him. This is a reflection of me as well. If he was unable to get the results that I was asking for, then I need to be held accountable as well, because I've been asking for those results. And this isn't solely his responsibility to make sure guys go 6 innings when they're going 5, or to make sure guys, ultimately, the players have to take a level of accountability as well. And I think they do that. I just haven't heard a lot of accountability from Jayce Tingler. I was not very optimistic that making a change with the pitching coach would really change the fortunes of the team. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope these last 4 or 5 weeks, they play their best baseball of the season. To me, it didn't make a lot of sense. If you want to move on from Larry Rothschild, that's fine. You can do it at the end of the 2021 season. Do I think he's the reason why things have not gone as well as they had hoped in 2021? No, absolutely not. I don't at all.
Moving to Tingler, or, keeping it on Tingler, that 16th inning games, that 16 inning game definitely was his low point, I would say, as a Padre manager. Just can't happen putting, pitchers, pinch hitters behind Machado and Cronenworth. Can't happen. How do you think it was a little ironic that this happened, days after he let go Larry?
It's a good question. I will say this. I'll kind of preface it by saying I think Jayce Tingler has done a good job as Padres manager, and I think he was put in a position that was pretty challenging as a young manager that hadn't ever had experience at this level or anywhere near it, and to be asked to, guide a team with a payroll where it is, with veterans, the guys that have won before, World Series, guys with high expectations. I mean, it's a tall task and it's a big ask, and I think he's handled it by and large fairly well. With that being said, I think some of the concerns that we had 2 years ago have been illustrated and brought to light over these last 2 seasons, including National League Baseball, which he didn't have to deal with in 2020. He probably doesn't have to deal with in 2022, to be honest. So maybe it's not as big of a deal as I made it out to be on a wrap-up show a week ago, which to me was an egregious usage of his 26-man roster on that night. And that game should be pinned on him. And if I'm going to speak to the media or in the clubhouse that night, I'm saying this one's on me. I messed this one up. I'll do a better job, and that's fine. If Bruce Bochy doesn't manage perfectly or didn't manage perfectly, he lost some games too. Dave Roberts is far from a perfect manager. Go look at how the fan base receives him over the last decade, right? So you don't have to be perfect. I thought he cost them that game, and I'll say that from here on out. He took the bats out of guys like Machado and Cronenworth repeatedly in extra innings because he didn't have a position player available. He didn't give his team the best chance to win, and I thought Dave Roberts did do that night, where he had pinch hitters available in the 15th and the 16th innings. And is it inexcusable? Listen, we're all human beings. We're not going to be perfect. You can make mistakes. I just wish he took a level of accountability. All these games are important in the second half of the year. The difference between winning that game and losing that game right now is magnified when you look at the wild card standings. So hopefully he learns from it and they don't find themselves in a similar situation moving forward. But again, if people would have said, well, this is why you go out and hire a Ron Washington, or you go out and look at someone that has that National League managing experience, and maybe Washington's not the perfect example there, but you can't get beat on double switches. And maybe that's not a Tingler. Maybe it's on the bench. Someone's got to know what's going on, who's available on that bench. And you cannot have a situation like that happen where in the 11th inning, the 13th inning, the 15th inning, pitchers are hitting for themselves. It just didn't make any sense.
Yeah. Do you see a scenario where Tingler does not make it back next year? I know Preller has said, yeah, we want him here for 10 years. But what if this team really, really struggles the rest of the way? In Cincinnati plays really well against, Pittsburgh, it seems like every night. Is there a scenario where you see the Padres just saying, you know what, Jayce, I'm sorry?
I waffle on this, to be honest, Ben. I think based on his body of work, he deserves the opportunity to manage this team in 2022, regardless of what happens over the final 29 games. I mean, what's the worst thing that happens? They go 10-19, they finish 500, and they miss the postseason by 7 games. I mean, that's not a great look, but that's the worst case scenario. Best case scenario is they make the second wild card. So those are your two from worst to best case scenarios. I guess in between there is you play decent baseball and you miss out because Cincinnati outplays you and they have an easier schedule and you get beat down the stretch. I think he deserves 2022. Do I think that there's a scenario that could play out like that played out with the Cubs a handful of years ago where they committed to their manager, and then when Andrew Friedman went to LA, that opened up a clause in Joe Maddon's contract, and then they had a chance to upgrade at the manager position? Is that always a possibility? I guess so. I mean, we don't know who's available right now. We don't know who wants to manage in 2022. I think AJ Preller and Peter Seidler are tasked with putting the team in the best position to win at all costs, essentially. What that means is it's not necessarily about feelings. It's not about anything other than trying to win more games than you won the year prior. So I wouldn't really envision it. I think the way it played out in Chicago really wasn't a great look for that organization, although they won the World Series, which is the ultimate prize. I think if you ask Theo Epstein, I've seen some quotes on it, he wishes it played out a little differently than it did, where they publicly backed Renteria. And then, later that offseason, they move on from Renteria. I don't think that was a very good look at all. But again, the goal is winning World Series. I mean, last time I checked, the Padres haven't won one. So if the difference between winning and losing one is a change in manager for 2022, I'm on board. I don't know how the fan base feels, but, if I'm being fair, I think that Jayce Tingler has performed well. Again, he hasn't been perfect. I don't know if he's been the best manager in baseball over these last 2 years, but I don't see a huge reason why a change in manager is going to be the difference between this team missing out on the postseason and then winning a World Series. Oh,
yeah. I mean, you could also, bring the argument back, like you mentioned, with the DH probably coming next year. It may be, because last year with the DH, they had a good record, and it looks like their team, the Padres next year with Clevenger coming back and hopefully Gore taking another step, that's going to be a loaded rotation. The bullpen should be solid again. The lineup obviously is going to be there. So you could make the argument that, well, he did good in 2020 without the DH, so maybe let's run it back there with a stronger team and see how it goes. Moving to the field, what have you thought so far about Fernando playing the outfield?
I mean, he's just amazing. I mean, it's just incredible what he's able to do. It really is. I mean, do I think he'd prefer to be at short? Yeah, I do. But I also think he's a great team player. I think that gets lost with Tatis because he's so brilliant and he's just a star. I mean, he's a star of stars. He really is. And his brilliance sometimes takes center stage over really the team's performance. But I really think in his heart of hearts that this guy is a team first guy. And I think we're seeing that firsthand right now in the second half of the year. And I think it's why he's going to be the MVP, because what he's doing, nobody's even asked to do, let alone accomplishes. I just think he's been great, to be honest. I mean, is it the greatest right fielder or center fielder in baseball history? No, maybe not yet, but I think he's very good defensively. And I think where he's had some of these struggles offensively over the last 2 weeks, I don't equate it at all to being in the outfield. I think he said the same thing. He said, it's more simplistic to that. When I miss pitches, it doesn't look very good. When I barrel balls, it does. And I'm not barreling balls. It doesn't have to do anything with me being in right field. When I'm in the batter's box, I'm in the batter's box. I want what's best for Tatis because I think it's what's best for the team. And if he wants to be a shortstop, and if that is what's in his DNA, then he should be the shortstop of the team. Even if you could be percentage points better defensively, with some other shortstop, Jay Cronenworth or CJ Abrams. Fernando Tatis Jr. is the next generation of Padres baseball. If he wants to be the shortstop, he's the shortstop. If it puts him in a better mindset, so be it. And that's good for the team. But no, I've been really impressed. I mean, I spent 15 years in minor league baseball. I saw guys make position changes that didn't work out. And it usually is a challenge. And there's a reason why you have the minor leagues, and it's to make position changes. But you don't do that typically in the major leagues. So I've been so impressed by him. I mean, he's literally, I've watched baseball my whole life. I've been as passionate about baseball as any sport, in my entire life. I have not seen anyone like Fernando Tatis Jr. Not to say there aren't other great players that have had amazing seasons and careers, but what Tatis does is special. He's a unicorn. I hope he continues to be this player for the next decade plus. And if he is, Padres are going to win a lot of games, and Padres fans are going to be really happy.
Where do you like him in the lineup? I don't personally like him fourth right now. I think that you need to – I get it's the first inning. The first inning thing I'm a big, proponent of, making sure that he's getting an at-bat, an extra at-bat there at least, because he's the best hitter on the team. He's the best player on the team, and getting him more at-bats should, yield to more success. Where do you see him in the lineup? Where would you, prefer him down the stretch?
I like power bats leading off, and I always have. And people say, well, isn't that counterintuitive? Because there's not guys on base, but there are. So, yeah, right. Only one time over the course of a game is it guaranteed that nobody's on base, obviously, for a leadoff hitter. But I'll take that with the prospect of him getting an extra plate appearance every single night, because no batter has a better chance of getting the extra plate appearances than the leadoff hitter, obviously. So, he's getting 4, obviously, outside of perfect games. So you're getting 4 plate appearances. You're oftentimes getting 5, where other guys later in the lineup, maybe not a cleanup, but obviously 5, 6, 7, you're not getting 5. And the idea that you're always getting 4 and sometimes you're getting 5. And I don't care if I have a power bat that hits for power without men on base. It's still of great value. I mean, the idea that you run into a ball and that leads to a run, of course, 2 runs are better than 1, or 3 are better than 1, but you'll take the 1. And the idea that you have more chances to score 1 run with more plate appearances from Fernando Tatis Jr. is why I bat him leadoff. And I just think it strikes fear in the opposing pitcher from the start of the game. I mean, you're leading off with Fernando Tatis Jr. He can make you pay, obviously, and you're also very cautious. And it puts the Machados and the Cronenworths and the Grishams and the Phams and the Hosmers in a better position in that inning, because there's a decent likelihood he's going to find his way on base, whether it's via long ball or just hitting or just walking. So I love when he leads off. And I know it's a short sample size. He hasn't done it a zillion times because he's only a third-year player, but he's had a ton of success leading off. That's where I plug him in.
What about Grisham leading off and Tatis hitting second? I kind of like that combination. Yep. Cronenworth hitting third, obviously. You keep going with the left, right.
Yep.
That's what managers want nowadays. And I think Grisham, obviously Tatis instills the most fear in any pitcher, opposing pitcher. But I think Grisham's up there too because of the at-bats he has, the ability that he has to foul off balls, and just the way, I don't know, it's just, for me, the way that he walks up to the plate, with the swagger. He's not, he's obviously confident. He's not one of those guys that walks up there and it's like, oh, will he, make contact, or he just doesn't seem like he's there. No, Grisham's there. So would that be your second option? If there was a second, you say Tatis lead off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely, Ben. I think it's a good point. I don't think Tatis needs to lead off every single game. I think if I was constructing a lineup, I'd be tempted to do it, if I'm being honest, because I just like my best hitter getting the most opportunities. And I like power bats leading off. I always have. I think that's where modern baseball is heading and has headed, to be honest with you. But I do like Grisham getting the protection of Tatis and seeing pitches too, because he is a power bat. And he's a little bit of a streaky bat for me, but when he's going, he's really going. And that can be very beneficial. So, yeah, Grisham leading off, Tatis leading off. I mean, I thought Pham had that 6-week run. It was very good. Now Pham's become more of a, utility piece at this point, and he probably hasn't deserved the opportunity to be just supplanted in that leadoff spot over the final 30 games of the season. But they do have options, to your point. I think they do have options. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's Grisham. For me, it's Tatis. Pham maybe based on matchup. That's where I'd probably be leaning.
Yeah. All right. 2 quick ones here. If the Padres don't make the postseason, what will you point to as to why they couldn't make the playoffs schedule-wise? Is it the stretch where they got no hit by Tyler Gilbert and got swept by the Rockies? Or is it, you think, this September stretch where they're playing pretty much all playoff teams other than the Diamondbacks today and then the Angels?
Well, there's a couple things I'm going to circle, and fair or unfair, everyone's going to do it. And the fan base, you're going to circle the trade deadline and say, how did they react after they didn't get the reserves that were basically being asked of by the team? I mean, Darvish goes on Twitter and puts, Google eye emoji on the Max Scherzer tweet. They were excited. We're all human beings. As they should have been excited. And then not only do you not land Scherzer, your rival lands Scherzer, and you get nothing to help with starting pitching. And the pieces you got have not benefited. And that's not on AJ Preller. I like the Frazier move. It hasn't worked out. I love the Hudson move. It hasn't worked out. Marisnik, that's fine. That's a defensive replacement pinch hitter piece. So I'm going to circle the trade deadline, but But your point is a valid one. If they miss the postseason, I won't tell you about how they didn't play well at Oracle in September or how they went, I'm making this up. If they go 3-7 on this 10-game road trip through St. Louis and LA and San Francisco, oh man, they threw it away. No. They threw it away going 3-13 over those 16 games against bad baseball teams. And they haven't played good baseball against bad baseball teams. That might oversimplify it, but those are the facts where they could have built a cushion by playing just average baseball. If we turn 3-13 into 8-8, there are 5 games up on the Reds right now. Mm-hmm. If we turn 3-13 into 11-5, which is the baseball they should be playing if they're a playoff caliber team, then they are 8 games up on the Reds. They're in the playoffs, regardless of September. They could essentially collapse and probably cruise into the postseason by going 11-5 during that stretch. So that's the stretch. That's it. I mean, we'll see how they play. They might play good baseball, Ben, down the stretch. They might go 18-11 here. But if the Reds go 19-10, which they're capable of doing, if the Phillies go 20-9, you get my point. The Phillies schedule is not a tough one. It's harder than the Reds. The Cardinals schedule is manageable, and they get the Padres for 3. All of these teams, all 4 of them are capable of making a run. That's what's so dangerous right now, that you can play good baseball, but if someone plays better baseball than you, you're out of luck.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the 3-13 stretch. There's so many stretches that you could point to. Just little games also, splitting that 4-game series earlier in the year with Pittsburgh when they probably could have screeched one out. You point to the 1-5 stretch against the Mets at home, the Mets on the road, and then they get swept by Colorado going into that Cincinnati game where Caratini at the walk-off. There's so many stretches that go ahead. Yeah.
I'll give you 2. How about Cincinnati? They're trying to go 7-0 in the season series. That last game at Great American Ballpark, I forget the circumstance, but they threw it away. They should have won the game. They led late. How about winning a series in DC after the All-Star break when your manager's talking about sprinting into the second half and they scored 24 runs in that opener? They won game 2 the night of the shooting outside Nationals Park. And then they're winning game 3 on a 2-run home run from Manny Machado in the 8th inning. Got to win that game. And if you do, you don't know how that changes the course of your second half and how you navigate it. But every team has that. We know that. Every team has winnable games that they throw away. It just does feel like the Padres put themselves in positions this year where they should have a handful of more wins than they have right now. And that ultimately could cost them.
Right. All right. Last one here. What percentage would you put on the Padres right now of making the postseason?
That is a wonderful question. And I do this every single night on Extra 1360. And I've gone anywhere from, in May, I would have told you there's no scenario where they're not in, like Baseball Reference, 99%.
Before the year they had over 90% chance to make it. Now it's less than 30?
Less than 30. It was 99% in May on Baseball Reference at one point. Now, we've waffled back and forth, me and Jim. I think at times over this 3-13, we've said they've got 1 or 2 cards in the deck of 52 that they could draw. That's 2, 4, 6% chance. I'm not overly optimistic. I'm objective and I like to be honest, and I don't sugarcoat anything. I think it's possible, and I think they have the roster that could get them there. And I do like this Snell, Darvish, Musgrove possibility. And with using them often and skipping, using that 5th starter on off days and getting the most out of Snell and Musgrove could be really beneficial. We could see them a lot in these final 29 games. And they've got this 5-4 lead against Atlanta. I always point to, they hopefully win that game. They could obviously lose that game as well. I don't think it's as good as 50-50, and I hope I'm wrong. And I think I'm being maybe a little overly optimistic and not being 100% truthful if I even tell you it's 40-60. They got to play their best baseball right now. And I'm encouraged that it might happen because of Blake Snell and because of Joe Musgrove and because of Tatis and Machado and these parts, Cronenworth, Grisham, Nola. I don't think we've seen the best of Nola. I don't think we've seen the best of Myers. Can Pham return to form to some extent? Can Hosmer give you anything like he has a little bit here these last 60 days? So it's possible, Ben. It really is. It's just, that 1 or 2 bad breaks where you throw away a game that you should have won could be very costly. And it's just, 16 games against the Dodgers and the Giants. What are you going to do? If you go 9-7, that's a pretty good record, isn't it? But will that be enough?
Yeah, and the scary part about that real quick here is that Giants-Dodgers stretch you're mentioning, they're probably still going to be fighting for the division. So it's not like you're going to be getting a relaxed Giants or Dodger team to play. You're not. You're going to be getting, those guys fighting each other against us for the division. So, all right, Jon, thank you so much for taking the time to talk here. This has been part 1 of episode 53 of the Talking Friars podcast. Again, Jon, thank you so much for joining. and we'll talk later down the road.
I look forward to it, Ben. Keep doing the good work. That was fun.
Thank you.